Welcome back, guys. So today we want to conquer nested statements. So previously we have looked at if statements and we've looked at iteration. So here we have an example of a really simple if statement. We have a very basic condition. It just says if x is more than 5, then print out this. Now, as we know, this section of code here is nested. So this block of code will only execute if this condition here is true. Now, when we look at this statement, this looks at both sequence and branching, right? So in sequence, we're looking at these two lines here. Here, a condition needs to be met, so we do a test. If it's true, then this gets executed. Once that's executed, we go back down to sequence, right? So I don't have line numbers here, I apologize. Let's move on to the next thing. Now what we have is this is what's called as a nested if statement. We know that this section here will only be executed if x is more than 5. And now we've added another statement, and this here will also only get executed if x is more than 5, but it's another test. So it's an if within an if. And this one is saying if x is less than 10. So if tongue-tied, if x is less than 10, then it will also execute this. And once we've done that, we go back down to our sequence. So here we have, let's say in a coffee shop, you might have maybe a display with a printed menu, and you might have to select from the menu to choose a drink. So it might be coffee, hot chocolate, tea, latte, whatever. The list would go much longer, obviously. And this is just an example of another if statement. So here, we're taking an input from a user, okay? Here on line 6, we're taking input from a user on line 6. And once we've got the input, we have our if statement. Okay, now this isn't a nested if statement. However, you know, when we look at it on a bigger scale, so for example, so you can see in the example here that that original if statement that we had, here's our original menu, right? There's our original sequence with our 3 if statements. That could be part of a bigger problem, or solution, should I say. That, you know, for example, choice number 1 could be, you know, would you like drinks? Choice number 2 could be for food, and choice number 3 could be for dessert. Now, I haven't got the whole code here, but I've just said, look, this is the section for choice number 1, and then what we have here is where choice number 2 would be for, what is that again? Drinks, right? Oh, no, sorry, choice number 2 would be for food. So you can see where it's nested now, right? So looking at this example here, I would like you guys to look at the worksheet which I have for you guys. It should be linked in the description of the video. That should take you to our webpage. And then I have 3 questions for you guys, exam style questions. And the scenario that we have is that, so this would be for a home automation system. And it's going to be very similar to what we've just looked at. Right, so I've got the worksheet here for us. And again, we've got the same scenario, so I've got the example scenario here for you. And I want you to write something similar to this, and the scenario is that you are going to write for a home automation system. The user will be asked if they want to change settings for lights or heating. And if they select lights, then the nested option should be that it should ask if they want the lights to be on, off, or dimmed. And if they select heating, the option should be to enter a temperature or to turn off the heating. So what I have for you guys, if I just scroll down a little bit and zoom out a bit as well, what I have for you guys is something I found quite interesting. I believe this was one of the exam boards, either the Welsh board or edXL. And what I liked is for writing if statement, they have several columns right at the beginning to help you manage your nesting. So let's just write an example if statement. So here we'll start our first part. So if x is more than 5, we'll use the second part of the column to say print x is more than 5. Forgive me, I'm not trying with my handwriting. And if I want to do an nested if statement inside that, then I would start that from the second column. If x is less than 10, and then print whatever my message was. And then when it comes to writing in exam papers, I do make one more recommendation, is that you end your ifs, because it makes it easier for the examiner to understand in case your alignment is not as straight as it can be in an exam. I know sometimes you have to squeeze things in, or sometimes you may have made mistakes and cross something out. So it's useful then that, for example, I end this if here by saying end if, and so obviously that ends, thank you, that ends this if here. And then if we do the same again, forgive me, just taking a moment, and I will do the other one here, end if, and obviously then that ends our other. So you make sure that you get your alignment correctly. So nesting is very important, and when writing Python, obviously we don't have end if, but in an exam scenario, I would do end if, end for, and even with procedures and functions, we come to that in our next lesson. It makes sense to be able to write the answer, so end down. Right. Having done that, let's go back to the slides. Right, so continue where we left off. So now we want to start looking at loops. And what we've got here is nested loops, right? So we've got one loop inside another loop. And you can see here that we have a variable called rows with a value of 3 and a variable for columns with a value of 5. And we know that rows is equal to 3. So basically 3 times this block of code, all of this is going to be executed 3 times, right? Now, so we've got to this line, then we've got to this line, right? And this line says for C in range, and we know that columns is equal to 5. So that means that this block of code here is going to be executed 5 times. What's being executed 5 times? 5 times, what we're saying is, take whatever string is and add an asterisk and a space to it, right? So at the beginning of this for loop here, we said we're going to do this 3 times. So 3 times, we're creating or assigning a variable called string, and it's blank, right? Just quotes. And then when we run this loop, we're saying 5 times, add an asterisk and a space to it, and that's going to be 5 times. So what we end up with then is we end up with 3 rows, and then what we end up with is 5 columns of asterisks and a space. Yeah. Now, what I've got here is this website. I think this is really useful. I've shared this with you guys because I think it's such a great way for you guys to learn to visualize your learning and what's going on when you execute some Python code. So if I just open this up very quickly. Right, so we can see here that the red arrow is, the red arrow refers to the next line to be executed, and the green arrow is the line that's being executed right now. So if we flip through this, it says there are 45 steps. You can see that how it's going to work, right? So we've come to this line number 5. Once we've got to this line number 5, this block of code here is going to be executed. Once we've got to line number 8, we know that that is going to be executed 5 times. So we can actually count through. Sorry, this is where it was executed. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's been executed 5 times. It won't execute that again. It's telling us that the next line is that, so it's going to do that. And then it should print the string out, right, before it ends this first loop, right? So once we've got to that line, it was printed the string. We now have our first 5 stars. And then we're going to go back to the beginning. Sorry, not here. Back to the line number 5. And then we do that all over again. So I won't bore you, but yeah, this is really good for seeing what's going on in your code line by line as you execute it. Right, so having seen that demonstration, my next challenge for you, and it's also a task on the worksheet, is I'd like you to look at this output. So this is the output that we want to see. Obviously, you can go back to the previous line of code as well, so previous slide, and look at this code. This is going to be what you're going to base your code off, so you use it as help. And we want you to be able to design an output that looks like this. You're going to need a nested for loop, like the previous slide. But this time what we want is we want 5 rows, but we want the columns to increase on each iteration of those 5 rows. So you've got to think about that. It's the second task on the worksheet. Once you've done that, the next one is this. So the next task here is that you display 3 rows, and each row has 3 columns, and they have numbers counting up like a number pad. So that will be the third task on the worksheet. Guys, I'm not going to go through the answers, but instead what I'll do is I'll put the answers in an answer sheet and attach that to the website as well. So, as always, guys, please like and subscribe. Go to the website, check out the worksheets, download them, attempt them, and I'll see you in the next video.